Hello, friends of Proudly Asian. It's been a while since I talked to all of you directly. How have you been and how was your summer? For those who are new here, I'm Isabel, the host of Proudly Asian, the podcast. And if you're new here, welcome to our little community. I know I've been sort of quiet on all things social media on Proudly Asian over the summer. And for those who have been keeping tabs or messaging me, you would know that I spent this summer in LA, sort of took a bit of what I would call a creative break. And I almost didn't record a podcast episode when I was in LA, and I barely filmed or published anything and just spent the entire summer in peace, or be present, or as I tried to be, watching movies, hanging out, playing mahjong as a noob with family, and there were actually a lot of movies out this summer. I'm not sure if you guys have already watched Deadpool and Wolverine, Inside Out 2. Those are really good ones, and those are kind of my favorites from this summer. And if you're up for it, we can definitely talk more about it. Not on the podcast, but we can always DM each other and talk about it. And so while I was in LA, I had the pleasure to meet a wonderful lady who's actually the mom of one of our previous guests on Proudly Asian. And she's currently working for the LA Chinatown Service Center as a therapist to support AAPI families and Filipino new immigrants settle in the States. So what's so amazing about her is that she's in her 50s and just decided after decades of focusing on raising a family of her own in LA, she wanted to try out a new career. She wanted to help people. So she enrolled herself in a school, and 2 years later, she became a marriage and family therapist working for the LA Chinatown Service Center. I was so lucky that she actually agreed to meet when I reached out as a stranger, because honestly, I was sort of expecting she would say no. I mean, it's just kind of like a weird request coming from a stranger saying that she wanted to film an interview. And I was just sort of expecting that she would think who's this random girl who would drive more than 30 minutes to meet in LA and want to film an interview on camera. I'm glad it happened because she's so much more wonderful in person. And it's sort of interesting to hear someone from our parents' generation talk about what it means to be proudly Asian. And her story is also a reminder to all of us that it's never too late to take that career switch. Because Joy didn't let the fact that she's in her 50s stop her from going back to school to pursue a new career after spending decades being a full-time mom. So it's never too late to start anything as long as that's what our heart desires. And this is what's so beautiful about this coming episode. But there's the bad news. The only bad news is that by the time I got to import the footage and audio of the interview, the footage actually wouldn't import no matter what I did. So I'm suspecting the heat where we filmed was too much for the equipment because it was so hot in LA. And so it is what it is. We lost the footage for good. And all we have is, thankfully, the backup audio, which is the reason why we can still release this episode. And I would say the audio quality might not be the best, but I'm just glad that I can share this conversation with you. So I hope that you will enjoy this conversation as much as I did. And if there's anything that you want to listen to on the upcoming episodes on Proudly Asian, send me a DM, say hi, tell me how you've been and what you want to listen to in the upcoming episodes. And without further ado, let's listen to the episode and we'll have a fuller catch up so very soon.
Welcome to Proudly Asian, a podcast series that tells bold and proud stories of Asians by Asians. My name is Isabel, your podcast host, and I'm here to find stories that challenge biases we face every day. There's never just one way to look at Asians. This podcast will take you through a deep dive into the life stories, struggles, and triumphs of young Asians around the world.
On today's episode, we have Joy De Jesus, a Filipino-American marriage and family therapist who works for the LA Chinatown Service Center. Born and raised in the Philippines, Joy moved to LA in the late 80s to raise a family. She then took a leap of faith in her 50s, going back to school to become a therapist. She joins us to talk about her work helping AAPI immigrants settle in the US and why cultural and language representation in counseling is so important. So, Joy, thank you so much for sitting down, chatting with us, telling us about your work. Excited to learn all about the work that you do and how you even got started with it. But first of all, could we start off with a brief introduction with you telling us your name? What are you currently doing at work?
Yep. Well, thank you for visiting me and thank you for spending time with me. My name is Joy De Jesus and I am a therapist. I'm a marriage and family therapist and I work right now as a program counselor. So what that means is there are certain programs that are run by the state and through the LA County, we serve families and individuals who need some support, especially in the area of behavioral health.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. My current position as program counselor is through Chinatown Service Center. It's a nonprofit organization and mainly we serve Asian Pacific Islander families or individuals. And since it's Chinatown Service Center, it was mainly conceived to service the Chinese American population or Chinese immigrants. And what they're doing now is expanding it to involve other Asian cultures. And in my specific department, they're mostly Chinese speaking, either Cantonese or Mandarin, and I'm the only one who speaks Filipino. But right now, my caseload is almost all Filipinos.
So how many cases are you kind of working on a day-to-day basis?
Since part of the program is home visitation, then our caseload is like, I have maybe 5 to 6 Filipino families in the family preservation program. And there's another program called the Partnerships for Families. And there I have 5 Filipino families also. And then I do individual counseling, individual psychotherapy for children of Filipino heritage, mostly school children. And I have about 6 or 7 kids.
So can you briefly describe to us what are some of the common issues that families will come to you to get support for?
So for the family preservation program, that's usually run by the DCFS, Department of Children and Family Services. So these families came into the purview of the department because of some potential child abuse or child neglect, and that's how they are referred to us. So we ensure that the children are safe and that the families are strengthened so that they can support their child and have their child in their home, remain in their home instead of being pulled out by and put into foster families. So I would say that among my Filipino families, a lot of the cases are due to, and most of them are surprised by the department's involvement and how intrusive and like how fast they swoop down. because culturally, as Filipinos, we discipline our children in ways that might be deemed as not acceptable here. Although it's not extensive or it's not that punitive, but yeah, sometimes they just look at it like, oh no, you can't do that. And so they get involved, the department gets involved, and our Filipino families are so surprised by that kind of, I would call it intrusion right now from the point of view of the Filipino families. Yeah. So that's the one program. The other program is like a step down, the Partnerships for Families. The department can be involved, but they don't open a case. They're saying that, okay, this family is not, it's a low risk. So they would refer the families to us, and mainly to prevent another case like that, or to support them, or to provide light counseling, light parenting skills, and also, again, to make sure that the children feel safe in the home. So that's the other one. And then the last one, it's under the child abuse prevention. It's called CAPIT, Child Abuse Prevention and Intervention Treatment. The children that get referred to us are, and it can range, it can be the child is exhibiting some conduct behavioral disorders at the school, or some anxiety or depression. Yeah, so mainly those.
Right.
So
And just to get some context about how this works, is like how a case would like land on your desk. Is it reported by, let's say, school, a third party, or do they come to like your office voluntarily and be like, hey, we need support? Or because like you mentioned, somehow there are some ways that parents discipline their children. It's not perceived as acceptable in the context of the US.
So sometimes it starts as a case of domestic violence, and either the neighbor hears it and calls the cops on them, or either the mom or the dad themselves would call the cops to just de-escalate the situation. So when that happens, then the department is actually called in, just to make sure that the kids are safe, if they witnessed it, because that is part of possible trauma for them if they witness that. And in that case, we get a call, they are referred to us, and the call is from the Department of Children and Family Services. When the case is opened by the department, there are court requirements, and family preservation can be one of the requirements. So we are there to fulfill a requirement for the family, so they are obligated to go through the services that we provide. But if the department says, okay, they're low risk, but we're still afraid that the children might be affected, and we need to educate the parents and teach them, hey, this is what you need to do as parents. You can't allow this to happen in your home, etc. Then it's voluntary. And they can still get referred, and they can still elect to have the services done, provided by us. But this time it's like, yeah, they are fulfilling it so that the department knows that they're cooperating, they're open to services, and they're able to take the steps so that these things won't happen in the future. Yeah, so it looks good, even if it's a voluntary, and if they do it voluntarily. And then some are self-referred. Like there's a mom, for example, who has some postpartum depression. Because that PFF, that second program that I mentioned, the Partnerships for Families, that is for families with children between 0 to 5. So children that are 5 and younger. So it's more like preemptive, preventive, because we want them to grow up healthy instead of reaching teenagerhood, and that's when the problems come out, right?
Right.
Yeah, so it can be a court order where they're obligated, or voluntary, or self-referred. Yeah. So a mom would say, I'm feeling very anxious. I think I would need some support right now. And then they can have.
Right. And so far, for the cases that you have worked on, are they mostly like predominantly new immigrants, or they have been around for a while?
It's interesting because one of my clients said something that really struck me. She said, you know, uh, you would think that you come here to America from the Philippines and you're all set. It's like life is good and life will be good from this point on. And then she herself said, but it doesn't happen that way. There are challenges, whatever form they come in, there would be challenges to an immigrant life. Even though you come from the Philippines and you think that here in America, you do better. It'll be well, it'll be good from this point on. So I brought that with me, and because she's one of the first cases that I've had, and I thought, yeah, that's such a myth that you move to America and you won't have any more problems. You just keep working, keep your head down and work and earn and provide for your family. But life takes many twists and turns. But in this work that I do, what I always tell my clients is there is help. That's the good thing about being here, is there is help available. And you just have to know. And I do a little bit of casework too with my families. We link them to resources. So for some families, they might not be aware that, there is medical available through the state. You can get some food aid, so we're able to help them in that sense too. It's not just all talk therapy, for example, or all counseling, but we're able to also provide them with concrete support, like linking, and there are discretionary funds available for them. Like if they exhibit a need, financial need, for example, they don't have rent for the month of July, I can apply for funds, to use funds to help them. So I think it's a good program in the sense that, you're not just talking with them and encouraging them and empowering them, but also providing some really solid, concrete support for them, or linking them to different agencies or departments where they can get help. And that's what I've always told them. There is help available. You just have to be able to recognize that, I need help. I'm going to ask for help.
Right. And obviously, we understand that in the US, there are very like polarized views about like immigrants, right? Especially new immigrants. And the easy narrative that people would go for is to see new immigrants as people who steal their jobs, get their resources with nothing to contribute to the country, right? But we understand that America is a country of immigrants. Everyone's an immigrant here. So I'm just wondering, like, from your point of view, from your interaction with some of your clients who are new immigrants, like, how would you maybe argue against this very harmful narrative about immigrants? Or like not in a confrontational way, but then just in a way that people would always view new immigrants as not productive. They have nothing to contribute. But as I understand, a lot of these new immigrants are actually very educated. They're very skilled workers. They have a lot to bring to the table. They just need the kind of support to get them started in a new country, right?
Now more than ever, I think that is a very real issue because of the political climate and the divisiveness that is going on right now is, I think, unprecedented, whereas before maybe it was there, it's in the underbelly, it was always present, but now it's like just egregious and more blatant, and people that are anti-immigrants are more vocal and empowered. And I think it's a very real problem for immigrants to overcome. Now, what would I tell them if they're new here? Oh, let me just start with my own experience. So I came here in the late 80s, early 90s. I came here because I got married and we had a family and all that. So my family was still in the Philippines, but my husband's family was here. So what I've observed from the generation before us is that they were big on assimilation, which at that time, I wasn't thinking about these things. Like, what am I going to do? Am I going to assimilate? Am I going to like hold on to my identity? Or I wasn't processing that. I was just I was in my 20s and excited for getting married, having a family. But now that I look back, I think the best advice that I have for anyone who's immigrating is, just find your identity and be solid in your identity. You're Filipinos. If you speak Tagalog, speak your language. Don't pretend that don't try to erase that accent, for example. Don't act white or something just so you can be accepted. And that's what I found just reflecting back. I didn't know that was happening then. But from parents of my husband and families in that generation, they were trying to erase that they came from the Philippines, or trying to overcome that, or trying to fit in ways that are disruptive or denying of their roots. And I think that's damaging more than anything. I think instead of paving your way to success with that kind of thinking, I think it's more disruptive because, as all we have is our identity, right? So I think you have to have a good awareness and not necessarily knowledge of history, because like my children were raised here, they did not have that history in school, for example. But even just an experience of what it's like being a Filipino, I think once you have that, once you know your roots, and again, that's where the pride comes from. You can't manufacture that. You can't just say, oh, I'm a proud Filipino. But you have to have a basis for why you're proud. And how can you have that if you have no association with Filipinos, if you have no experience with Filipinos, and your only thing is, oh, my mom is Filipino and my dad is Filipino, and yeah, I'm proud to be a Filipino. I don't think you can even say that if you don't have that foundation. It's not even about speaking Filipino is great. Having the language capacity is awesome. And I don't want to be like a snob or an elitist about this, that, those who don't speak Filipino are not good enough. Nothing like that, because it all comes from the inside. And like Jess, for example, my daughter Jessica, I was so surprised with how she is a Filipino through and through. And I don't know how that happened, but and same with my son, same with Miles. They have such a love for the Philippines and Filipinos, and that's all I could ask for. And again, they didn't go to school in the Philippines. They weren't raised in the Philippines. But I think part of it is that I spoke to them in Filipino at home. Same with my husband. We both spoke Filipino, even though they would answer in English. At that time, I didn't force them. I didn't tell them, okay, at home, Tagalog only. At school, you can speak whatever. But that's how we just were. Henry and I, my husband and I, would speak in Tagalog to them at home. And I think that's part of it, because I can't explain to you how they turned out the way they turned out. I'm just thinking back, that might be part of it. And I'm thinking about other Filipinos, their age, for example, or even my age, I think, even my generation, who would say, I wish my parents spoke to me in Tagalog, or something to that effect, that I wish I knew how to speak Tagalog because their parents would speak Filipino. Yeah, so, and I think my love for the Philippines was just coming across, and that's probably what was transmitted to them as well, I think.
Yeah, so I completely agree with you. Like, even though, like people might not have grown up in the Philippines, they might not speak the most fluent Tagalog, but it's really the thought, the efforts that work to try to connect with the culture and the people that counts.
Yeah, and just circling back to your question about what can an immigrant do to kind of overcome those biases or discriminatory or microaggressions, really, I think you just have to know who you are. You have to be rooted in who you are. And if you're an immigrant with an accent, or speaking Tagalog, or eating food with your hands, or you have to just stick with it and stand up for it, be proud of it, instead of hiding or being timid, or because you don't speak as well, or you can't express yourself that well. So I think that's, this isn't just for Filipinos, of course. This is across the board. I think you can't deny your heritage. You have to embrace it.
I agree. And now going back to the work that you do, you mentioned you are the only Tagalog speaker at your office. So I want to understand more about, like, why is it so important to have native Tagalog speakers to be doing what you're doing?
Okay, let me backtrack a little bit about this job. So when I graduated from MFT, Marriage and Family Therapy, I took several months off, took a year off. I didn't right away go into work or look for a job. So when I started looking for a job, one of them was Chinatown Service Center as an outpatient therapist, which is what I applied for. But their HR asked me, said, hey, we have an opening, and I didn't know about this. We have an opening for a Filipino speaker, for a Tagalog-speaking counselor. Are you interested? And I go, oh yeah, I'm interested. I would love that so much. But then I was thinking, wait a minute, all Filipinos speak English. Why do they need a Tagalog speaker? I mean, that's the first ever I've heard for a need for a Tagalog speaker for any kind of work. But now I know there's more. But still, I was so surprised. I go, why do they need one? All Filipinos understand English, speak English. Our mode of instruction in the Philippines is English from kindergarten all throughout. So I go, really? Okay, let's see. So I went, and someone even interviewed me in Filipino just to find out my proficiency. Of course, that's my native tongue. I speak Tagalog like, sometimes my husband doesn't understand me because my words are so deep. My Tagalog is so deep. So I go, what the heck? What are you talking about? I go, okay. So I did it. And for the first few months, they weren't coming. There were no Filipino families. So I was doing Hispanics. I was doing African-American families. And then now my caseload is all Filipinos. And there is a need. There is My Filipino families, our sessions are in full Filipino. And as you know, language is very important. Language is like your medium to connect. And all languages have nuances that are not translatable. And especially the families that come to us are in crisis. So having that connection right away is super important and super comforting for them. They hear you speak Tagalog and immediately they're like, yeah, I know you understand me. Even without them saying a word or even without you knowing what their history is. Or, yeah, there's that level of comfort and there's that bond right away. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, like we want to talk about how important it is to have culturally competent and also, counselor or therapist to just understand the culture without having to like spend hours to explain, for the clients to explain their cultures, right? So I'm just wondering, like, for the kind of work that you do, like, what would, for example, for the Filipino families, like if they get connected with a non-Tagalog speaking therapist, what could be something that the therapist or someone who doesn't speak Tagalog miss in terms of support or emotional support?
I'd like to say that most therapists, if not all therapists, are very compassionate and very competent at what they do. So that kind of empathy, hopefully, you always get. But Filipino families don't talk about emotions. So to them, mental health is go to sleep, you wake up in the morning, you'll feel better, or get a boba drink and you'll feel better. So it's like not spoken about, it's swept under the rug, it's denied, it's like almost taboo. I think it's improving a little bit, but almost like, no, we'll just pray about it. I'll just pray for you and you pray too and you'll be good. So I think that is something that a non-Filipino therapist or counselor would find, hey, let's talk about emotions. Come on, tell me what you're feeling right now. Why can't you share it with me? But as a Filipino counselor, I think that's something that we know. We know that, okay, we're not going to elicit any emotions right now, but we can talk about other things and then it would come up. And then, of course, they feel safer just opening up to someone who speaks the language, have lived there. I was born and raised there. So, and I still go back. So my mom's still there and lots of families there. As you know, Filipino families are extended families, super extended families. So, yeah.
I see. And going back to an earlier point that you made, like you want to make sure that your clients or, like new immigrants know that there is help. So for those who think that they need help, what are the proper ways to get support, to reach you?
Yeah, okay. So first you have to recognize that you need help and then have the wherewithal to ask for help. Because sometimes the pride gets in the way, like, okay, I'm not gonna go knocking at agencies' doors and because it's embarrassing or it's shameful or I don't want my neighbor to know that I'm receiving aid, that I'm paying EBT at the grocery for my food. So first, you should have an awareness that you need help and that there is help and that you can ask for help. So coming to a nonprofit like us, and there are many, we're not the only ones. And some nonprofits, they handle different forms of, like there is one that's dedicated for domestic violence, there's one dedicated for children, not necessarily that the child protective services are involved, And then if they come to us, we will be able to direct them to these things. Because sometimes it's hard to navigate these systems. It's hard to find, oh, where do I go for this? Yeah. And like I said, we do a little bit of case management for them, and we can also provide the funds for them. So we do a lot of outreaches to communities to let them know that we have services available and they can come to our office. We have workforce development for those that need some certificate courses or even small business loans. Yeah. And like I said, we're not the only ones, but community outreach is big because then we set up at a park and people come in and they get to know us, get to know what types of services we offer.
Right.
So at Chinatown Service Center, we have medical, dental, optometry, and behavioral health is just one aspect of it. Yeah.
So the first step they need to do is just probably pick up a phone or drive up to a center, talk to someone, and get it started.
Yes. And even those hotlines, there are many different hotlines that they can call and they can be referred.
And I mean, here's a personal question for you, because I know that you mentioned you have not always done this. So how did you get started? Why did you get started?
Okay, like I told you, I was born and raised in Manila. I went to school in the Philippines. And when I graduated from college, I wanted to be a curator, a museum curator. Yes. But then my dad said, you know what? Because I'm the eldest in the family. And he said, no, you know what? Because to do that, or I wanted to do Philippine studies. But oddly enough, Philippine studies, to do further Philippine studies, you'd have to go to Columbia University here. So anything that I wanted would entail for me to leave Manila and go somewhere else. So he said, you know what? Your siblings are still young. I have half siblings as well. So they're still young. You're the eldest and all that. My parents are separated. So he goes, why don't you just continue studying here in the Philippines? And my dad said, why don't you go into med school? And my mom said, they're separated, right? And she told me, why don't you go to med school? I go, okay, why don't I go to med school? So I applied to med school and I got accepted. It's a long story, but I got accepted to med school even without doing MCAT and doing the required courses for med school. And I finished med school. But immediately after that, I did my internship. I have my license to practice medicine in the Philippines, but I didn't do any residency programs. I got married and had children. I worked a little bit here in genetics at the Genetics Institute. Yes, so I was doing that until I had my son, Miles, and then Jessica. And at that time, I started staying at home full-time as a full-time mom. And when she graduated, that's when I went back to school. Since we live here in Pasadena, I was thinking, I want to go to school close by. There is Fuller Theological Seminary, and I was looking at their courses, and one of them is marriage and family therapy, which I wanted also because I thought, you know what, in the Philippines, that's part of my motivation always is, how can I give back to Filipinos, or maybe I can do something in the Philippines, because as you know, there are a lot of OFWs, and it has really broken the fiber of the families in the Philippines because one parent is working away for long periods of time, long stretches of time away from the family. So you have children growing up with just one parent, and then you have some broken families because of the separation. You have dad who has another girlfriend, or mom who has something like that. And so I was thinking, okay, maybe this is something, because it's marriage and family therapy, right? So I'm thinking maybe I can kind of swoop down and help and provide some counseling support or strengthening families. So that's what I was thinking of when I got into this master's program for MFT.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to school for 2 years, did a practicum 1 year, and now I'm here.
That's dedication. Like after being a full-time mom raising two beautiful children for so long, and then you know go back to school and it's not even the shortest, the easiest program, and you still like manage to finish it, and now like picking up a new career. And I think there's also like a very good point that you have sort of like repeated throughout the interview, which is like, you know, there's that like different cultural context when it comes to family dynamics, right? Like you mentioned with Filipino families, especially those in the Philippines, like some sort of like family separation is very common. In every family, but when it's seen from the context of the West, then they'll be like, oh, how dare you leave your children? You know, that's not acceptable. So I'm so grateful that you're doing the kind of work that you're doing, because you're essentially bridging that gap and that like whole cultural gap. As much as you're helping these Filipino families settle maybe in a new country, you're also like educating, you know, colleagues who are not from the same culture about the needs and the dynamics of these families, right?
Yeah, where I work at Chinatown Service Center, there is a part of me that's being naive, but I feel lucky and I feel like I work with the best people. Because sometimes I would hear my husband come home and he would talk about office or workplace intrigues, or he's not a petty person, but there are still some that, you know, he would be able to tell me sometimes, and I go, oh wow, I'm glad I don't work with people like that, because I'm in a profession that those in the profession are compassionate and aware, and so I brought this up with my supervisor, and she said, don't be fooled. There are places where you will still find those people. It still be challenging. But okay, so going back to my workplace environment, because we're all from a minority culture, I think there's more understanding, more
Awareness.
Yeah, more awareness, more consideration of those things that are taken for granted in the bigger.
This is why like working in like a diverse workplace is so beautiful, because like even let's say, me ethnically Chinese, I would appreciate it if let's say my Filipino colleagues or like let's say Vietnamese colleagues tell me that, oh, this is their way of doing things, to sort of like enrich my knowledge. It's like, oh, I had no idea. You know, despite we're all Asians, we still roll very differently. And I always appreciate it when people tell me like, oh, this is how we do things, or like they would be coming from like a good, let's say if I misbehave in a certain cultural context, and if someone is kind enough to tell me, oh yeah, this is actually not cool, you know, in this culture, I was like, oh, I had no idea, but now I know. So like I really appreciate that kind of environment. So it sounds like a pretty awesome office that you're working in.
Yeah, no, I do love it. And yeah, like I said, I may be naive, but it's great. It's great for coming into the workforce again after so long, after 20 some years. I think it's a good thing to like ease my way into.
It's tough to find a place full of like compassionate people with barely any ego. Yeah. And finally, we have reached the last question. I know you talked a little bit about like being proudly Filipino, but I still want to hear from you. Like, what does it mean to be proudly Filipino to you?
Okay. So again, like I mentioned, you need to have a foundation, a knowledge, an awareness, an experience of Filipinos, of the place, or even if you're here, even if you're in a foreign country, but being around Filipinos, observing traditions and all that. So you need something like that to inform your identity, to inform your values. And once you get that, then the pride will just come through. I think. And it's not something that you have to work on, or it's not something that you have to be consciously, oh, I'm a proud Filipino, so I'm going to buy Filipino, or I'm going to patronize this Filipino singer, for example. That happens like as an outflow of what you have in your core as a Filipino. How do I express that pride? I think just every day, just representing as a Filipino, even at home, even at the workplace. It's how you live your life, I think. And it will come out. It will come out naturally, effortlessly, because then it's at your core. It's who you are. You cannot deny it. You cannot keep it down, or you can't cover it under a blanket. Yeah. So, and I think that's how my children got it. Is because I would always not speak about the Filipino in superlative ways, or because as a people we have our flaws. As a person, I have my flaws. I make mistakes all the time, but it's how you, in the aftermath of it, how you deal with it, or how you fix it, whatever you need to do to be able to have a good, harmonious life, So I think that's how it is. That pride emanates. It's something that is almost like second nature to you. So I know that even I'm thinking back at like how I raised Jess and Miles, for example. I don't know how, I can't even think of a specific thing, because like I said, it's a daily representation of being who you are.
You just live proudly Filipino.
Yes, I am Filipino. Although sometimes people, I think I look Filipino, but sometimes people are like, Chinese. I go, no, I don't know. I've just told you we were in Egypt. We were in the souk, the market, and you know how they are. The vendors there, they will
Ni hao.
Yes,
Kung fu,
they will
Jackie Chan.
Everything but Filipino.
I think that's sort of beyond their knowledge in a way.
Yeah.
Because they see an Asian person, it's like, Chinese, Japanese, konnichiwa.
Yeah, they would do that. So yeah, I think that just being out there and representing decently, and I don't even want to say well, because, just representing, just being present, being there. I think that's how you can show your pride as a Filipino.
I agree. That was beautiful. Thank you so much.
That's it for this episode of Proudly Asian. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at proudly.asian for more content. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Leave us a 5-star review on wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in and signing off for now. I'm Isabel Wong.